They put a gun to her head on the open road, and her husband sat still as a fence post and did not move a muscle. Not one. Clara Pruett screamed his name and he just sat there, hands loose, eyes down, quiet as a man waiting for supper. 6 riders, 6 rifles, and the man beside her, the man who was supposed to be her husband, her protection, her reason for being on that road at all, gave them nothing. Not a word, not a flicker. If you love stories about the quiet ones who carry the deepest thunder, subscribe right now. Drop a comment telling me what town you're watching from tonight and stay till the very last word, because what you think you know about that silence is wrong. Dead wrong. Now, let's go back to the New Mexico territory. Late autumn of 1883. The cottonwood leaves had gone the color of old rust, and the Rio Puerco had been running low since July. The high desert had that particular quality it gets in November, the kind of cold that doesn't announce itself, just moves in quiet and stays. Dust on the road between the Pruett Ranch and the town of Caldera Wells had been cut up by freight wagons all week, and by the time Clara and her husband Eli crossed the dry creek bed at the edge of the Vandermeer Range, the afternoon light was already going flat and orange behind the mesas. I was a young man back then. Road dispatch for the county surveyor's office, which means I saw most of what went on along that stretch of road. I'm old now, older than I planned to be, and I can tell you without hesitation that what happened to Clara and Eli Pruett in the autumn of 1883 is the truest thing I know about this country and the men it produced. Pull up a chair. The fire's got a few hours left in it yet. Clara Pruett had turned 24 that September. She was the second daughter of the late Hector Maves, who'd homesteaded the Arroyo Blanco spread some 11 years before she married and left it. The ranch she married into wasn't large. 140 acres of grama grass and red clay, a decent creek along the north fence, a house with 2 rooms and a sleeping loft. Eli had put up the fencing himself that spring. She'd seen the work and thought that counted for something in a man. The willingness to dig post holes in hardpan under a July sun. She had not married him for love. She would not have told you that back then. But she knew it. Her father was 6 months in the ground. Her older sister had taken the Arroyo Blanco spread to pay a banknote, and there was no room for Clara in that arrangement. Nor any warmth in the asking. Eli Pruett had come to her through the church circuit, a quiet man of 32 with a good face and no apparent vices. He did not drink. He did not gamble. He was polite to women and gentle with horses, and he'd built a sound fence. So she said yes to him in April, and by October she was still trying to figure out exactly who she had married. He wasn't cold, precisely. He was just still. He spoke when there was something to say. He ate what was put in front of him without complaint. He slept on his side of the bed with his back to the room, and she could never quite tell if he was asleep or simply lying there, watching the dark behind his eyes. She'd asked him once, early on, where he was from before Socorro. He'd said, around, and not elaborated. She hadn't pressed. That was the thing about Eli Pruett. He had a way of making you feel that pressing him would be somehow impolite, like asking a man the exact size of his debt. She had begun, in quiet moments, to wonder if she'd made a mistake, not in a dramatic way. Just a small, practical worry that settled into her chest on certain evenings when the wind came in under the door and the lamp guttered and she looked across the table at this pleasant, unremarkable stranger she had agreed to spend her life with. She thought, if anything happened on this road, if anything came at us out of these hills, what would this man do? And the answer she kept arriving at was nothing much. He'd be polite about it, probably. She was wrong about that. She was more wrong than she knew. The land they were riding across had been in dispute for going on 4 years. The man who wanted it was named Douglas Vandermeer. He was not from New Mexico. Originally, he'd come down from Denver with a land company in the late 70s and had made himself into something that the territory tolerated without exactly respecting. He owned the assay office in Caldera Wells, a share of the water rights on the Puerco's northern fork, and 3 judges in 2 counties. What he wanted now was the creek that ran along the north fence of the Pruett place, because without it, his western cattle operation was going to need a 15-mile detour to water. He had asked politely. Once, through a lawyer. Eli had said no, quietly, through the same lawyer. Since then, things had been moving in a direction that lawyers don't cover. Vandermeer's head writer was a man called Farrow. Farrow was the type who wore his cruelty like a good hat, openly, with some pride. He had a scar through his left eyebrow from a knife fight in Tucson that had left the eye milky and wrong, and he'd learned to use that eye as a kind of tool. Turn it on a man and watch what happened to his breathing. He had 4 riders under him who each had their own particular flavor of bad. There was Coop Dillard, who was stupid and mean in equal measure, and made up for what he lacked in thinking with what he had in enthusiasm. There was a pair of brothers from Texas everyone called the Mercer boys, though only one of them was actually named Mercer. They liked to work in tandem. And there was a Mexican gun hand named Ruiz, whom Farrow paid twice what he paid the others because Ruiz was genuinely dangerous, and everyone knew it. And paying him meant Ruiz wasn't working for somebody else. These were the men who came over the rise, at the east bend of the Caldera road, at about 3 in the afternoon on a Thursday. Clara heard them before she saw them. The sound of horses at speed has a particular rhythm, and when she turned on the wagon bench, there were 6 of them coming up hard from the draw, spreading out as they came, the way dogs do when they've got something cornered. Eli pulled the wagon horse to a stop, not because he panicked. He just stopped the wagon, easy and quiet, and set the brake. Farrow rode to within 10 feet and didn't bother greeting them. "Pruett," he said. "Vandermeer's made his final offer. $500. Clean title transfer. You're gone by the 1st of December. Eli looked at him for a moment. Then he said, quietly, "I know the offer." "That's what I said. I'm here to see if you've got a different answer." "My answer is the same as it was." Farrow nodded. Slowly, the way a man nods when he's already decided what comes next, and is just letting the other man finish his sentence before it doesn't matter anymore. He said something to Ruiz with his eyes, and Ruiz came around the wagon on the left side, and Clara felt his hand close around her arm above the elbow, before she understood what was happening. She was off the wagon bench in one motion, and her feet hit the road and she fought him. She wasn't a small woman, and she wasn't a timid one. She got her elbow into Ruiz's chin and drew blood from his lip, and he swore at her in Spanish. Then Coop Dillard was off his horse, and he was bigger than Ruiz, and he grabbed her by the back of her coat and lifted her half off the ground, and she screamed, "Eli! He didn't move!" She screamed his name again. She was looking straight at him. He was sitting on the wagon bench with his hands loose in his lap and his hat brim low and his eyes on some fixed point about 6 inches in front of the wagon horse's ears, like he was doing arithmetic in his head, like she wasn't screaming his name at all. Farrow smiled. The milky eye caught what was left of the afternoon light and turned it into something wrong. He said, "Smart man. A man that knows his situation." Eli said nothing. "Here's what happens," Farrow said. "Your wife comes with us to Vandermeer's station house. She stays there, real comfortable, no harm done, until you sign the deed transfer and ride out of the territory. You got a week. After a week, the situation gets less comfortable. You understand me?" Eli's hands were still loose in his lap. Farrow studied him. Something crossed the man's face that wasn't quite recognition, more like a memory of a feeling. Something that almost made him look twice. But he looked at Eli Pruett. Quiet, still, unremarkable. And he let it go. He turned his horse. "Ruiz, Dillard, bring her." They put her on a horse. She fought the whole time. She called Eli a coward, and she meant it with every fiber she had, and she watched him sit on that wagon bench, hands loose, eyes down, not moving, until the curve of the road took her out of sight. She spent that night thinking she'd been more wrong about a man than any woman had ever been wrong about anything. She had not been wrong. Not even close. Before we go any further, partner, I want you to do something for me. If you're new to this channel, hit that subscribe button right now. These stories come from the real bones of the frontier, and I'm going to keep telling them as long as you keep listening. Drop a comment. I want to know where you're watching from tonight. What time is it where you are? Pour yourself something warm if you've got it. We're only about a third of the way in, and the best of it is still ahead. Now, there was a man in the town of Caldera Wells that Thursday evening who had been drunk since Tuesday, which was not unusual for him, and his name was Amos Pritch. Pritch had been many things in his life, none of them particularly admirable. He'd dealt cards in Abilene. He'd ridden rough for a cattle outfit in the Panhandle that the law eventually caught up to. He was, by any reasonable measure, a man of limited virtue and limitless thirst. But he had good eyes, even drunk. And when Eli Pruett walked into the Starlight Saloon at 4:30 that afternoon and ordered a glass of water, Pritch looked at him from his corner table and felt something happen to his stomach that he could not immediately name. He watched Eli drink the water. He watched Eli set the glass down and stand there at the bar, very still, the way a hunting bird sits still on a post, not resting, waiting. Pritch had ridden with men who moved like that. Only two kinds of man moved like that: the ones who were afraid to draw attention, and the ones who had no reason to care who was watching. Eli Pruett was not afraid. Pritch looked at the hands. The way a man's hands rest tells you most of what you need to know about what those hands have done. Eli's sat at his sides with a loose precision that made Pritch's mouth go dry. He got up and walked to the bar. He said, quietly, "You wouldn't be the Pruett that just took the Maves girl's land, would you?" Eli looked at him. Not a long look, just enough. "Eli Pruett," he said. "That's right. Married name. That's right." Pritch was quiet for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, so the barman wouldn't hear, "I seen those hands before. Different name. Long time ago. I'd swear before God those were the hands that left 3 men dead in a street in Laredo." Eli looked at him. There was nothing in those eyes that Pritch could have described afterward. Not threat. Not denial. Nothing he could put a word to. "My wife," Eli said, "is at Vandermeer's station house on the North Fork." Pritch swallowed. "Right," he said. "That's Farrow's territory." "Yes. Farrow has Ruiz." "Yes," Eli said again. "I know who he has." Pritch looked at him for a long moment. Then he did something he didn't fully understand at the time. A decision that later he would try to explain as simple human decency, though he'd never been especially known for that quality. He said, "Station house is built along the creek. One way in from the south, one from the east. They'll have a man on the roof and one on the gate after dark." Eli nodded once. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," Pritch said. "I'm going to sleep through whatever happens next. And I never saw you." He went back to his corner table and started on a new bottle, and did not look up again. By nightfall, the story Pritch would not tell anyone for several years had already begun to write itself on the desert floor. The station house sat in a shallow bend of the creek about 4 miles north of town. It was solid construction, riverstone foundation, pine plank walls, a good roof, the kind of building Vandermeer built to last. Clara was put in a room at the back with a window that looked out on the creek and a door that locked from the outside. A woman named Tozer brought her food and didn't speak much. Clara ate. She kept her fear low and practical. She had grown up in this country, and she knew that fear, handled right, can be fuel. She thought about the week she had. She thought about Eli sitting on that wagon bench, and she told herself the thought of him was no use to her now. She'd have to find another way. She inspected the window latch. She looked at the walls. She memorized the sounds of the house and what they meant. The creak of the front steps, the way the eastern door stuck on its hinges, the guard's footsteps on the roof, going north to south, predictable as a clock, every 12 minutes. She was, in this way, her father's daughter. and she was doing exactly what she should have been doing. The other thing she should have been doing, thinking about the road ahead of the fire, not behind it, she could not quite manage, because she kept seeing Eli Pruett's hands loose in his lap, and some part of her could not stop asking, what kind of man sits still for that? The kind who has sat still for worse, it turns out. His real name was Elias Cole. He had been Eli Pruett for going on 5 years. Before that, he was Elias Cole of San Angelo, Texas. And before that, he was a name that certain men in certain saloons between El Paso and Dodge City said quietly and with particular care. He had ridden with a company of federal marshals in the mid-70s, the kind of company that wasn't quite official, and handled the kind of problems that the official channels declined to touch. He had been, in the cleaner language of the period, a problem solver. In the less clean language, he was a gun hand, one of the best who'd ever lived. By the count of men who kept track of such things, he had gotten out of it the hard way. There was a town called Cutter's Bend, up in the Texas Hill Country, in the spring of 1878. A job that was supposed to be clean. 5 men he was sent to bring in. Only one of the 5 was actually guilty of the thing they said he was guilty of. Elias had known it before he rode in, and he had ridden in anyway, because he had been following orders for so long that the machinery of it had replaced the thinking. 3 men died who should not have died. The one guilty man escaped in the confusion, and Elias Cole put his guns in a saddlebag that evening and rode north, and did not take them out again for a long time. He'd spent 2 years moving through small towns, working with his hands, learning to be unremarkable. He was good at it, a quiet man who built sound fences and ate without complaint, and did not drink and did not quarrel. He'd found Socorro eventually, and the church circuit, and a woman who wanted a partner in the plain American sense of the word, a person to work alongside, steady and present. He hadn't told her about Cutter's Bend. He hadn't told her about the gun still rolled in the saddlebag under the floorboard of the tack shed. He hadn't told her about Elias Cole. He'd thought, with some regularity, that he should. The fire in the wash north of the station house was small and smokeless. He'd made it that way. He sat beside it for an hour after dark with the guns out of the saddlebag for the first time in years, checking them with the mechanical patience of a man who'd learned that thoroughness was the only prayer that actually worked. 2 Colt single-action revolvers, .45 caliber, a Winchester repeating rifle, 73 model, that he'd kept in working order out of something he'd called habit, and now understood was foresight. He oiled them and loaded them and laid them on the ground beside him and looked at them for a while. He thought about Clara. He thought about the look on her face before the road turned and she couldn't see him anymore. He was going to have to explain a great many things to her. He was going to have to start with the truth, which was harder than it sounded, because the truth was not a short story. He thought, first things first. He went over the math one more time. 6 men total at the start. Farrow, Ruiz, Dillard, the 2 Mercer boys, and whoever they'd left on watch at the station house. The road in, the road out. The creek as a noise barrier on the north side. The moon was 3/4, which was enough to see by and enough to be seen. He'd need to work fast, and he'd need to work quiet. He put out the fire. What came next took about 4 hours and covered a fair amount of ground, so let me tell it to you the way the men who pieced it together afterward told it to me. Eli had arrived at the station house while Vandermeer's crew was still at supper. He knew the building's layout from Pritch's description and what the moonlight showed him when he crouched at the edge of the creek willows and watched. He counted men and noted their habits, and drew the picture in his head the way a man plans a route through broken country. There was a guard on the roof, moving north to south on a 12-minute rotation, exactly as Clara had worked out from the inside without knowing it. There was another man on the gate, sitting on an upturned crate, half asleep. Farrow's horse was at the hitching post. Ruiz's horse was in the corral. The Mercer boys were somewhere in the bunkhouse east of the main building. From the sound of it, he took the man on the gate first, No shots. The man woke up the next morning with a headache and a confusion about exactly how that had happened, and was grateful, on reflection, that those were the only injuries. He took the roof guard the same way, quiet and quick and without theatrics, and zip-tied the man's wrists with his own belt. He did not want a gunfight inside the building. Clara was in there. What he wanted was to get Clara out. What he got, because Coop Dillard came back from relieving himself behind the horse barn at exactly the wrong moment and spotted the gate guard on the ground, was a gunfight. Dillard had a voice like a dinner bell and he used it. The station house lit up from the inside. Farrow came out the front door at a run with a rifle in his hands and stopped when he saw the darkness in front of him and that particular quality of silence that a certain kind of waiting produces. "Pruett," Farrow said. "Step away from the door," Eli said from somewhere in the dark. The voice had a quality to it now that it hadn't had on the road that afternoon. Flat. Final. The kind of voice that has said things like this before and knows what usually follows. Farrow was not a man who backed down easily. He raised the rifle and shot at the voice, and the voice was not there anymore. The shot hit a fence post. The muzzle flash lit Farrow's face for a half second, and then the dark closed back in. "That was a warning for me," Farrow said. He meant it as a taunt. The words had barely left his mouth when Eli's voice came from a different direction entirely. "No," Eli said. "That was a warning for you. The next one is a different kind." Ruiz came out through the side window. He was the smartest one on Vandermeer's crew and the most experienced, and he came out shooting, low and fast, changing direction as he moved, which is what a man with real training does. He nearly made it work. He was 3 steps from cover when something in the darkness to his left produced a sound like a thunderclap, and Ruiz sat down in the dirt and didn't get back up. He was breathing. He would continue to breathe. He just wasn't going to be useful to anyone for several weeks. The Mercer boys came out of the bunkhouse together, which was their nature, and went back into the bunkhouse together a short time after that, their enthusiasm having failed them when a voice from the direction of the corral told them in plain language exactly what would happen if they came any further. They went back in and locked the door and stayed there. It was, by any measure, the right decision. Coop Dillard ran. He ran south on the creek road and didn't stop running for a considerable distance, which was also, in its own way, the right decision. That left Seb Farrow. Farrow was standing in the open ground between the station house door and the gate, and he had figured out that he could not locate Eli Pruett in the dark, and that Eli Pruett apparently could locate him just fine, and this understanding had done something to his breathing. The milky eye was useless in the dark. He turned the good eye left and right, and the dark gave him nothing back. "Who are you?" he said. Not a question. More like a man talking to himself. "Let me get my wife," Eli said, "and then I'll tell you." Clara had kicked out the window latch at the first sound of shooting. She was out on the creek side of the building, and she'd found her way around to the front, and she was standing 10 feet to Farrow's right with a broken chair leg in her hand, which was what she'd managed to arm herself with. And she was watching the darkness with the same focused stillness her husband had been demonstrating all day, as if something about it had finally made sense to her. Eli came out of the dark, and she saw him clearly for the first time since the road. Different. Somehow. The same face, but arranged differently. The loose quality was still there. In the hands, in the way he stood. But now she understood. It was not the looseness of a man who wasn't ready. It was the looseness of a man who was always ready and had learned not to waste the tension. He looked at her. Something crossed his face that she would think about for years afterward. A kind of relief that was tangled up with something else. Something more complicated. "Clara," he said. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said. "Good." He looked at Farrow. "This is Douglas Vandermeer's man. He works for the man who took you off the road. I'm going to give you a choice now." She looked at Farrow. Farrow's rifle was pointed roughly at where Eli had been standing, which was no longer where Eli was standing. "What choice?" she said. "You can step back and let me handle this. Or—" He held out one of the Colts. "Grip first." She took it. Farrow said, "Now hold on." "Drop the rifle," Clara said. She had never in her life pointed a gun at a person. Her voice was level, her hands did not shake. Her father had taught her to shoot at 16, and she had not forgotten. Farrow looked at the pistol. He looked at the man in the darkness. He set the rifle on the ground. "On your knees," Clara said. He went to his knees. She breathed. She looked at Eli. "Now what?" "Now we tie him up," Eli said. "And we go back to town, and we find the federal marshal's office. Because Mr. Farrow here is going to tell the marshal some things about Douglas Vandermeer that the marshal is going to find very interesting." Farrow said nothing. "Isn't that right, Mr. Farrow?" Farrow remained silent. "The thing about Vandermeer," Eli said, almost conversationally, "is that men like him always leave records. A man who owns a share of the water rights, and 2 judges keeps records. Because records are how you keep the people you've bought from developing ideas about changing their minds. Those records are in a lockbox in the assay office, and the key is in Vandermeer's desk at the station house, which I already found. A federal marshal with those records and the testimony of a man who's been Vandermeer's head writer for 3 years could put Douglas Vandermeer in a territorial prison for a considerable portion of the time he has left on Earth." He looked at Farrow. "Which is a better outcome for everyone than the alternative." Farrow looked up at him. "Who are you?" "Right now I'm the man who's giving you a choice," Eli said. "The same one I gave your friend. You can talk to the marshal, or you can make a different decision." Farrow made the smart choice. Most men do, when the alternative is visible. We got the full story in pieces over the weeks that followed. Amos Pritch sobered up enough to tell his part of it to the federal marshal, who had arrived from Albuquerque on the Monday after the business at the station house. The marshal's name was Corbett, a tall, careful man from Ohio who had been in the territory long enough to not be surprised by much. He wasn't surprised. He took Farrow's testimony and the lockbox records, and he went to see Douglas Vandermeer at his ranch on the Puerco's North Fork, and he came back with Vandermeer in handcuffs, and the word that 2 of the 3 judges Vandermeer had owned were going to be having some professional difficulties in the near future. The Mercer boys had surfaced in Las Cruces a week later and been picked up without much trouble. Ruiz recovered from his wound and made a statement and then disappeared, which Corbett allowed with a discretion that I have always respected. Coop Dillard was found in Albuquerque, at a boarding house, still frightened, which he would remain for some time. Clara and Eli drove back to the Pruett ranch that Friday morning in the same wagon, on the same road, and the ride was quiet the way their rides had always been quiet, except that this time she was the one who ended the silence. She said, "You need to tell me." He was quiet for a moment. Just the horses' feet on the road, and the dry creak sound of the wind through the grama grass. "Yes," he said. "I do. All of it. All of it," he agreed. He told her about San Angelo and the Marshall Company and Cutter's Bend. He told it the way he told everything, without decoration, the plain and ugly shape of it. He told her about the 3 men who shouldn't have died, and the 1 man who got away because of the confusion he'd caused. He told her he'd been carrying that for 5 years and hadn't found the right architecture for putting it down. He told her about the guns under the tack shed floor and why he'd kept them and what he'd thought on certain evenings when he looked across the table at her. He told her about Elias Cole and what that name meant in certain places and why Eli Pruett was a better name for the man he was trying to be. She listened to all of it. When he finished, the ranch gate was visible at the end of the road. She looked at it for a while. Then she said, "You're going to teach me to shoot properly." "Yes," he said. "Not just how to point and threaten. No, the real way. And you're going to tell me if someone comes to the gate before they get to the house." "Yes. And next time," she said, "you don't sit on the wagon bench like a dead man and let them take me off the road. He was quiet. Then he said, I had to know how many, and where Ruiz was, and which one of them had the clearest shot at you if I moved wrong. She thought about that. She thought about the stillness and what it had meant, the loaded spring quality of it. You were counting, she said. I was counting. You knew you couldn't stop it right there, on the road. Not without risk to you. No. She looked at the gate. She looked at his hands on the reins. She thought about the gun she'd pointed at Farrow, and the way her voice had not shaken, and the way Eli had looked at her when he'd held the pistol out grip first. That tangled relief and something else. What was the something else? I asked her, years later, when she told me this story by her own fire. She was 60 by then, and Eli had been gone 2 years, and she'd become the woman who ran the schoolhouse and the lending library and half the town council of what was by then just called Pruett Wells. She smiled when I asked her. I think he was surprised, she said. I don't think he expected me to take it. But you did. Of course I did, she said, and she didn't say anything else about it. They spent the following weeks in a new arrangement. He taught her to shoot the way he'd been taught. Stance, grip, breathing. The trigger pull that comes from the pad of the finger and not the crook of it. He set up fence posts at varying distances, and she put holes in them until the distances stopped mattering to her hands. He showed her how to read a man's intentions from his feet before his hands gave anything away. He taught her the difference between a threat and a commitment, and why most threats are empty and most commitments are not. She was a fast learner. She had, as it turned out, always been a fast learner. She had simply not had the right teacher for these particular subjects. By December, she could put 3 shots in a 6-inch circle at 40 yards in a wind. He told her that was better than most men he'd ridden with. She said she didn't find that especially comforting, and he said he understood. They had long evenings in that period. The land dispute was finished. Vandermeer's holdings went into receivership and the water rights reverted, and the county paid no more attention to the Pruett Ranch than it paid to any other honest operation. The work of a ranch in November is substantial, and they did it, side by side, in the matter-of-fact way of people who have been through something together and come out the other side not quite the same. He was not easy to know. She had known that from the beginning. What she understood now, that she hadn't before, was that it wasn't a failing in him. It was the shape of what he carried. A man who had been Elias Cole could not simply lay that down and become someone else. The past doesn't let you. But it doesn't have to be all of you, either. That was the thing she had seen in him that made her not turn back. One evening in December, she was at the kitchen table going through the ranch accounts, and he came in from the tack shed and he stopped in the middle of the room. She looked up. I need to tell you something else, he said. All right. The man from Cutter's Bend. The one who got away. I've been told he's been in this territory. She put down the pencil. How long have you known? 3 months. 3 months, she said. Before we married. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the wind had come up and the cottonwoods at the south fence were making their winter sound, the dry rattling of old leaves that hadn't quite fallen yet. Is that why you said yes? She asked. To the church circuit. To Socorro. To me. He was quiet for what felt like a long time. Then he said, It was part of it. At the start. I'm not going to tell you it wasn't. And now. He looked at her in a way he hadn't looked at her before. Straight on. All of it visible. Now it's not part of it at all, he said. She picked up the pencil. She looked at the accounts. She said, You'll tell me when there's a development. Yes. And we'll handle it. Yes. Together, she said. He was quiet for a breath. Together, he said. The man from Cutter's Bend never came. Whether he heard the name Elias Cole was still in the territory and made a different calculation, or whether he found a different country entirely, nobody ever knew. Some things resolve themselves by the gravity of what they might become. And what Elias Cole had become was something that even old enemies made careful decisions about. Clara Pruett ran the ranch for 43 more years. Eli ran it with her for 31 of them, until a winter that was harder than most took him, quietly, in his sleep, the way he had always done things. She buried him at the north fence, near the creek he had refused to sign away, and she planted a cottonwood over the grave that is still there now. She told me once that she thought about Cutter's Bend for a long time after he was gone. Not with bitterness, just with the particular weight of understanding a man fully, finally, and knowing you will not get to ask him any more questions. Was he a good man? I asked her. She thought about it. She said, he was trying hard to be one, and I think that's the most you can ask. The men who think they're already good are the ones who stop looking. Now, I'm an old man. I've seen this territory change into something Eli Cole would not have recognized. The towns are proper towns now. There are newspapers and law courts and telephone wires going up along roads that used to be just two ruts in the red dirt. The frontier that made men like Elias Cole is gone, mostly, and what replaced it is a better thing in most ways. But I have not met a man since who had that quality of stillness, that loaded spring quiet that means he has already thought through everything that happens next, and he is simply waiting for the world to catch up. Most men who carry weapons carry them to feel bigger than they are. The ones who are actually dangerous don't need to feel bigger. They are already as big as they're going to get, and they know it. And that knowledge makes them very calm. The real darkness, in my experience, is not in men who do wrong. Wrongdoing is simple and old, and we all understand it. The real darkness is in the good men who put their guns in a saddlebag because of what they did wrong, and then have to decide, standing in a dirt road with a pack of rifles pointed at the one person they have agreed to protect, whether the man they're trying to become is equal to the man they're trying to leave behind. Eli Pruett sat still on that wagon bench in the autumn of 1883 and let them take his wife, because he understood in that frozen second that moving wrong would get her killed, and that moving right would require him to become Elias Cole again, and he needed a few minutes to make peace with that, which is not cowardice, which is, in fact, the harder thing. And then he made peace with it, and then he moved. Now, before we close, I want you to know that this is a fictional story, written and produced with the help of artificial intelligence, set in the American frontier. The names, characters, places, and events are invented. But the questions they raise about men and loyalty and the things we carry, and whether the past is a prison or just a very heavy coat, those are real. Those have always been real. If this story found you tonight, partner, subscribe to this channel. Leave me a comment. Tell me what part of the world you're in, and what time it is, and what made you stay till the end, because the end is where the real story lives. Like this video if you want more stories like it, and until our trails cross again, you keep your powder dry and your soul honest. The fire's going down. That's enough for tonight.